Greetings, everyone. Thank you for attending the Regional Transport and Energy Connectivity webinar at the 2022 AIIB annual meeting. I will make a few words of introduction. Trade plays a vital role in boosting the economic development of developing countries, and international trade relies heavily on global and regional connectivity, which in turn relies on the twin pillars of transport and energy infrastructure. The speakers of this webinar will discuss the evolving requirements of regional connectivity policies in these two sectors, transport and energy. It will also explore initiatives and strategies to enhance regional connectivity investments in this changing environment. While I will lead off with some questions, I would urge everyone to explore these matters beyond what has been enunciated. Let me briefly introduce the panelists. We have a great panel today, comprising of policymakers, practitioners, financiers, and academia. As our opening speaker, we have Ms. Sharifa Khan, Secretary of External Resource Department at the Ministry of Finance, Government of Bangladesh. Then the panelists are Ms. Kartika Listriana, Assistant Deputy Minister for Strengthening Regional Competitiveness, Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, Government of Indonesia. Mr. Satwinder Singh, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN. Mr. Hussein Al-Ghailani, Executive Director, Head of Coverage Public Sector, the National Infrastructure Fund of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And from the academia, we have Professor Chris Zegras, Head of Department of Urban Studies and Planning, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. As you know, at the end of this, towards the end of this panel discussion, we have a short Q&A session. So may I remind the audience that they may type their questions through the Q&A button on the live stream page. Having introduced the panel, let me now invite Ms. Sharifa Khan to make her opening remarks. Over to you, Ms. Sharifa Khan.
Thank you. Mr. Urjit Patel, Vice President of AIIB, moderators of today's program, respective panelists, esteemed audience, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Bangladesh. It is indeed an honor and privilege for me to join this webinar on regional transport and energy connectivity organized by AIIB. I extend my heartfelt thanks to AIIB for giving me the opportunity to say a few words in this gathering. This is, at this current stage, this is extremely an important topic at the age of globalization, as a strong intra and inter-regional connectivity not only strengthens trade, but also contributes to accelerate income and reduce poverty. Distinguished audience, countries all over the world are struggling to improve their intra and inter-regional connectivity. The Asia-Pacific region is no exception to this. At this stage, we found that the strong growth and economic development in this region. This region's recent economic growth has been driven largely by international trade, foreign direct investment, and emergence of global and regional production network, as well as global value chains. The region, however, is yet to develop regional network connectivity in an integrated and coordinated way. Sub-regional organizations in this area, such as SAARC, BIMSTEC, ASEAN, SCO, and ECO, have programs to improve connectivity within and among its member states. However, we still is far behind compared to other regions or the requirements needed. Let me now turn to Bangladesh. Bangladesh has the geographical potential in connecting South and Southeast Asia. Accordingly, it has been pursuing transport and energy connectivity with other Asian countries to accelerate and sustain its economic growth. We have undertaken a wide range of projects to upgrade our highway and transport network. I would like to extend thanks to AIIB and all other development partners for their support in this effort. But we need to go a long way in facilitating connectivity within and beyond the country level. Ladies and gentlemen, Bangladesh is an active partner of the well-known Asian Highway Project conceived by UNESCO that passes through 32 Asian member states with linkage to Europe. Another renowned one is the South Asia Sub-Regional Economic Cooperation, which is known as SASEC program, that brings together Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and will go beyond that to connect us with East Asia through Myanmar and China. Bangladesh has already implemented a number of projects to realize the SASEC objective. The need for infrastructure investment in this region is enormous. Bangladesh appreciates AIIB's intense involvement in Asia's development, particularly improving the regional connectivity. Till today's AIIB's investment commitment in Bangladesh is 2.61 billion in roads and highways, power and energy, water resources, and socio-economic infrastructure sectors. We also hope to build a partnership of 5.2 billion with AIIB in next 4 to 5 years. Distinguished audience, due to COVID-19, most of the countries have to divert resources to protect human lives and livelihood. Hence, initiatives for sustainable and long-term development goals have lost pace significantly. We need to regain this speed, particularly in the areas of physical infrastructure development, to ensure improved connectivity, supply of essential utilities, and better integrated global supply chain. Although several initiatives are underway to promote regional connectivity, challenges still remains to make the regional connectivity initiatives partly and fully functional. The main challenges ahead for cross-border connectivity are securing funds for infrastructure, building trust among the member states, and formation of effective partnership among the countries. It is a shared responsibility of regional countries and our development partners to come forward with necessary financial and technical resources for improvement of multi-dimensional regional connectivity. During this current global energy crisis, we strongly believe our regional cooperation is extremely needed so that we can build our own energy hubs and regional connectivity. I believe boosting investment in sustainable infrastructure focusing on regional connectivity, especially in Asia, would be a prime agenda of AIIB in 2023 and beyond. I look forward to work with you and hearing from you, hearing your valuable inputs for improving regional connectivity and improving our livelihood through improving the connectivity. Thank you, AIIB, and thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Sharifa Khan, for that fairly comprehensive introduction to the seminar. And Sharifa Khan will now leave us, and I will now turn to our 4 panelists. So the first question that perhaps we can start off is, in your view, what are the key factors and challenges that jointly shape regional transport and energy connectivity in the post-pandemic world? And what are their implications on future demand for infrastructure investments? I think each speaker can take 3 to 4 minutes to give their views on this, or they can turn it into a broader subject. So if I can request Ms. Kartika Listriana to start, please. Thank you.
Thank you. A very good evening to you all from Indonesia. The Honorable Ms. Sarifah Khan, Secretary of Economic Relations Division, Ministry of Finance, Bangladesh. The Honorable Moderator, Dr. Petel, Vice President Investment Operation. The Honorable all of speakers, Mr. Rusat Vinder Singh, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Economic Community. Mr. Hussein Al-Gailani, Executive Director Head of Coverage Public Sector National Infrastructure Fund, Saudi Arabia, and Professor Sabri from Massachusetts. Thank you for your question. First of all, I would like to deliver many thanks that we invited in this precious event from AIIB. In my point of view, there are some challenges that jointly shape regional transport and energy connectivity as part of infrastructure development in the post-pandemic world. First, in the limitation of Indonesian national budget, we call APBN, to fund infrastructure development based on Indonesia's National Medium-Term Development Plan 2020-2024, the total of infrastructure development projects around Indonesia cost more than 6,000 trillion rupiah. Whilst the allocation of infrastructure development within the national budget could only cover around 37% from the aforementioned total cost. Thus, there is a big funding gap that needs to be found. The solution happened in order to fully implement the national infrastructure project, including regional transportation and energy connectivity project. Second, the budget refocusing policy for national COVID-19 pandemic mitigation effort. Aside from the budget refocusing policy to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic in national level, the government of Indonesia also focusing in the National Economic Recovery Program, or we call PEN. In the short term, the recovery program aims to facilitate efforts in handling health, providing social assistance, and supporting business activities. This program will create job opportunities and stimulate economic productivity to reach its optimum capacity or closing the existing gap. And third, the low quality of existing infrastructure, which create a high logistic cost. On the first quarter of 2021, Indonesia logistic costs reached the 23.5% of the overall GDP. This is a relatively high cost in comparison to the neighbor countries around ASEAN, including Malaysia, which only costs 13% of their GDP. Inevitably, logistic costs become one of the most important factors that hampers the economic transformation process. This derives from the low quality infrastructure and the limited range of the existing infrastructure around Indonesia. However, the government of Indonesia has strategized some critical key factors which aim to overcome the aforementioned issues. These key factors are including: one, in the implementation of creative financing initiative as the funding alternative for infrastructure development. The government opened opportunities for private sector to be involved in the infrastructure development funding effort. Other than that, opportunities also open for national and or local state-owned enterprises to participate within the public-private partnership scheme. This initiative is a shift on the current funding paradigm to encourage more alternatives and close the gap between funds demand and availability. And to implement such initiative, in 2020, the government adopted the Presidential Decree number 32 of 2020 on infrastructure funding through limited concession scheme. At this moment, the government is creating another policy which encourages the land value capture scheme as another potential funding alternatives. The second, the designation of national strategic project as a national level infrastructure project prioritization. With the resuming public mobility post-pandemic, we understood the needs and importance to create an integrated and sustainable public transport connectivity. And our government adopted National Strategic Project, or PSN, which comprised of critical infrastructure projects and strategic programs to be prioritized and applicable for certain incentives. This includes the development of public transportation connectivity, toll roads, airport, and seaport, which not only support our national connectivity, but also enhance regional transportation connectivity. And last but not least is strengthening the institutional ecosystem to complement infrastructure development acceleration effort. In the implementation of public-private partnership scheme, the government orchestrates a conducive institutional and bureaucracy ecosystem. Some of the efforts are establishment of the Committee for Accelerated Priority Infrastructure Delivery, or we call KPPIP, as the institution to coordinating and debottlenecking infrastructure development issues, and establishment of Public Partnership Office Government of Indonesia as the source of information and public partnership related policies making. Cooperate with Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund, Ltd, to give a warranty and solid construction plan on infrastructure development funding. And cooperate with PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure Ltd, the company, to strategize on funding, project preparation, and consultation. I think that's all, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Listriana. May I now request Mr. Satwinder Singh, please?
Thank you, Dr. Patel. First of all, thank you to AIIB for inviting the ASEAN Secretariat. It's wonderful to be here, joining the panel with all of you distinguished excellencies and panelists. Let me first start that, transport and energy sectors, we are definitely in a very fundamental period of transformation and change. I think it'd be understatement if we say we are probably today facing some of the biggest challenges. And it's coming not just from the pandemic, not from the current inflationary pressures that the entire ecosystem is facing, but it's also the geopolitical challenges. Now, all of these, together with the need for us to look towards a low-carbon future, they are all coming together in one moment right now. And therefore, these deep pressures are going to be there for transport and energy sectors to start, even including both the project promoters and the financiers, to start looking at reinventing themselves, basically re-looking at how they are going to plan for the future, especially the future that will involve sustainable infrastructure. Just let me expound a little bit of what I've just shared. I think definitely in the post-pandemic world, the challenging world that we are facing today, I think there's already going to be a major shift in capital availability. And that's really going to shape the future direction of how we're going to be able to secure the resourcing that we need in order to build our connectivity. One thing is for sure, I think with all these deep challenges, and it always happens in time in history when deep uncertainties are inflicting our economies, I think procrastination is definitely going to prevail quite largely. I think non-decision in deployment of big capital, I think it's going to be a challenge for many of the governments in the region. The fact is that even though in ASEAN, even if you look at our numbers this year and the coming year, it's going to be a positive growth. And we may be able to even touch 4.5% of growth. Next year, 5%. But ultimately, even though other regions have been embroiled in deep challenges, ASEAN has been trying to develop its connectivity with our economic partners. 1st of January this year, there was the coming on board of the largest FTA in the world with our trading partners, the RCEP agreement. This is the agreement that's led by the ASEAN member states, 10 countries, together with Japan, Korea, China, Australia, and New Zealand. On top, just a couple of weeks ago, we actually inked the largest air services agreement in the world. That was with the European Union, the ASEAN and the European Union. So I think there's no lack of effort on part of the region, to start reinventing, use this occasion to make itself relevant, more connected in every way, to lay the foundations so that projects, investments in transport and energy, it becomes even more bankable, much more stronger. But I think the challenge will still remain. The uncertainties that we are confronting today, they are here to stay. Now, on the second part, besides the geopolitical challenges, the economic challenge, I think there's also going to be a huge amount of pressure towards kind of a just and sustainable transition to a low carbon economy. And again, this is not just imperative to the private sector and the funders. Now, this is also, front and center in all decision-making of member governments. Now, all of us in the ASEAN, they are all signatories to the Paris agreements. And we are really at a fundamental critical step in order to address climate change and also kind of making sure that we are able to secure our region's resiliency towards a low carbon future. I think in this context, I'm also happy to say that, ASEAN, we are working in developing an implementation plan on a framework for circular economy, which again will be extremely useful for the transport and the energy sectors. At the same time, we are also developing an ASEAN strategy for carbon neutrality, which again will outline very practical steps towards achieving a net zero economy for the region. Naturally, we are going to be seeing the importance of mobilizing good capital, smart capital, that will help us foster a sustainable investments to leverage the green growth. And again, this is where we have also been working very hard to pursue some of the several finance-related initiatives, such as the ASEAN Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, which again, we have actually done part 1 already last year. In fact, phase 2 of the conversation happens now, a critical stage where the taxonomy is going to be, a framework will be coming out with ways in order to deal with transition finance, which again, all of us know, which is like a critical element and a critical part of our transformation journey for both transport and energy sectors. So I think the challenges are real, they are there, they are tough. And I think the worst of all, of course, we are not in the best circumstance in order to give the funders and the project promoters the full confidence. But I think we all have to use this opportunity, like what we have done in ASEAN, to take full advantage of the situation and to make use of this situation to strengthen ourselves. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. May I now request Mr. Al-Gilani, please?
Thank you, Dr. Patel, and good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending on where you are on the globe. And thanks to AIIB for the opportunity. It's a great pleasure for myself and for National Infrastructure Fund of Saudi Arabia to participate in this panel and in this event with such distinguished panelists. I think the question that we have today is we are looking at it from a point of view of given that we are basically at the inception phase in the National Infrastructure Fund in Saudi Arabia, and the mere establishment of the fund is a demonstration by the country towards supporting and promoting the delivery of critical infrastructure in the country specifically. And the way we are looking at it is by seeing how the infrastructure sector by and large has performed over the last few years. And I think it's, while the numbers seem to suggest that the infrastructure sector across the globe was, I think, one of the most resilient compared to other industries and sectors. One cannot really judge at this point in time, given that, especially for the energy and transport connectivity sectors, it's facing a unique challenge, I would say. We are still, and I'm talking about probably the region, the MENA region, and specifically Saudi Arabia, we are still, recovering from the pandemic implications. A number of capital projects have been impacted, and they are trying to recover back to normal. And in fact, we could say that the geopolitical issues that are now happening across the globe are playing a major role in how we are approaching the new projects. The supply chain disturbance that happened over the last 2 years, and that are still easing in some parts, but are not probably in other parts of the value chains. All of which is contributing towards how we perceive and how we approach the infrastructure projects in the future. Now, adding to that, you could also see the global attempts to combat inflation, and at the same time, the way that the world is trying, or the different parts of the world is trying to position themselves, competing for growth. I think the last few weeks seems to have suggested that there has to be a trade and a balance to be made between the two, and there has to be an understanding at a global level, at a regional level, and probably at a local level on what should happen and go first. Now, if you add to it also that prior to before the pandemic, we were seeing different parts of the world that have plans just to catch up with their infrastructure needs, and especially when it comes to energy and transport. I think when you look at the whole picture, I think it's still uncertain, and all of this uncertainty has to be factored in when we come and start formulating the solutions of the future. Now, when we come, if we zoom into our local experiences, though that the NIF, or the National Infrastructure Fund of Saudi Arabia, is still fresh at an inception phase, but we are coming with a clear mandate in Saudi Arabia that we have to continue what has started and what has been delivered over the last 40 years. It has been, Saudi Arabia has been building its infrastructure, with a solid track record, be it, self-funding its own projects, and it's to serve the basic needs of the population and its people, or whether it's be to help and improve the serving the industries, the key industries that Saudi Arabia has been known for, and we are seeing it, and we have seen it in the likes of the oil and gas infrastructure. Thankfully, we have seen how important it is to plan well, building resilient infrastructure so that it can absorb and cope with shocks that could face the world when it comes to providing the globe with secure and safe supply of energy. The same goes for the petrochemical industry. The same also applies to, even serving the holy sites in Mecca and Medina. Energy has been a key element to ensure that, and transport has been also the same. And we have been trying to achieve that. So NIF coming at this stage, the intention and the plan was that, and that's, I think, the implicit plan is that the country has been developing quite well on all those fronts, be it self-funding the projects or in with its track record in public-private partnerships for the water and power projects, all of which is coming to a stage now where we have now to build on all of that. Our solutions have to align with all of those ambitions, have to make sure that all those uncertainties are reflected in a way where we don't hinder the delivery of those projects. Rather, I think this is probably would be more of the theme of how we should address it in this session. I think it's now more about properly understanding how and where we should focus on, understanding the why of why we support certain sectors, especially when it comes to energy projects and transport projects. Definitely, we need to look at the bigger picture and zoom in also into the local level. Saudi Arabia has been also trying to make sure, and I think the last few years we have seen a number of initiatives with neighboring countries, be it the railways with the GCC countries, be it the GCC interconnection arrangements that we have established, and it's expanding to also serve other neighboring countries that are in need for energy. The different arrangement that Saudi Arabia is trying now to build with countries like Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt, and for different reasons. So I think one of the key takeaways from, if I may wrap it up, is basically that we need to understand properly what the different countries, and especially in our case, what our country, Saudi Arabia, would like to achieve out of the different arrangements that it would like to have, whether at the regional level or at the local level, and then develop solutions that would foster those arrangements, and that could also include the participation of other partners, and we are really glad to see that happening also with AIIB, though we are still at the inception phase. So I think probably I will leave it here. We could probably pick it up at a later stage.
Thank you, Mr. Elani. May I now request Professor Zagras, please?
Hello, and thank you very much for AIIB for the invitation, and thanks for all the panelists and the speaker for their remarks and insights. I speak with the disadvantage of coming from a very different region. I'm here in the United States, in the state of Massachusetts, with not an in-depth knowledge of the challenges nor opportunities that the region faces. And I'm also have the advantage in this particular context of being able to respond in some sense to some of the previous speakers. I'd like to just start with saying my own expertise is more at the level of urban and metropolitan level mobility. And so clearly they're interlinked with the regional connectivity questions. So I'm going to try to speak a bit about how these two intersect and what some of the challenges and opportunities are. With respect to mobility in general, I like to think of this always as the end goal is not movement per se. The end goal is enabling the access to the goods, services, opportunities that individuals and firms require. And this accessibility can actually be achieved in multiple ways. Of course, always it can be achieved through enhanced mobility connections, shorter links, faster links, improved or more affordable services. But it also is very much affected by the spatial distribution of opportunities, where more proximity is always better for accessibility. Of course, we as individuals and firms influence our ability to take advantage of the opportunities in the mobility services. There's also the quality of those opportunities. And then finally, there's digital technologies such as this right here, where we improve links, improve technologies, faster, cheaper, higher quality service enables accessibility in some form. Not saying it's a perfect replacement for mobility, but of course it offers one. And this also then lends itself to a somewhat of a challenging trade-off in this space, because you can improve accessibility, that is our ability to realize the opportunities we need, either as firms, as individuals. You can improve it through enhancing the mobility services, but you can also improve it by increasing proximity. And these two can often be at odds because mobility infrastructures and services occupy space that otherwise can be occupied by other opportunities such as housing, commercial services, businesses, and so forth. Connectivity is not digital connectivity does not figure into that because it's occupying a digital space that we're not otherwise using for productive services. So with that in mind, I would just like to say that I think a critical aspect that we should be thinking about here is maintaining the capability to provide non-declining accessibility over time. And that then points to a critical challenge that one of the earlier panelists talked to, which is the need for us to get to net zero economies as quickly as possible, given the climate crisis in front of us. When we think about improving accessibility, and I'm speaking from the extremely privileged position of North America, where we have high levels of accessibility, some might argue an excessive amount, especially when we think of the global distribution of it. And North Americans enjoy a level of accessibility much greater than many of the people who live in the region. And of course, we have our own issues of internal distribution of this, because there's a highly skewed distribution in our country that's related to the distribution of income and wealth. But we also need to think about, how do we do this with reduced local noise and air pollution? How do we do this with reducing the financial costs, enhancing safety and security, promoting active lifestyles for people, a critical issue, at least here in the United States. Again, emphasizing I am coming primarily from a North American perspective. Economic empowerment, this is in part linked to the PPP opportunity that we heard about earlier, but again, mitigating and adapting to climate change. And just want to speak to a moment to that, because if we think about mobility's contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, either from the freight side or the passenger side, we know that this is a product of four basic areas. The activities we pursue, those are trips, whether they be by people or by by passenger vehicles or freight vehicles, the trips and the distances, how those are allocated across the different modes, because different modes have different energy consumption or emissions profiles, then the fuel intensity of those modes, and then the fuel choice of those modes. So those are the four key components that we need to think about the role of mobility and how in initiatives such as regional connectivity might, and infrastructures related to it might influence that. And I think that then points me to a critical point I'd like to raise here. Each of those activities, mode share, fuel intensity, and arguably even fuel choice can be influenced by the infrastructure choices we make at the regional and metropolitan scale. And of course, these are interlinked because the infrastructure we build for regional connectivity ultimately comes into the regions and metropolitan areas within which the majority of our populations live or will be living, because we're a continuously urbanizing planet. The experience in the United States, of course, is one where we embarked on our major national infrastructure development in from the 1950s up until the 1990s, where we built a large-scale highway system, and this had very important impacts on our urban areas. There's evidence that shows how causally this actually led to enhanced expansion and suburbanization of our urban areas, and we know that that is actually then correlated to higher levels of automobile dependence, higher levels of truck traffic dependence, and greater levels of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, much of this infrastructure ended up destroying urban fabrics. I live in the Boston metropolitan area, and we still have evidence of this. And retrofitting these, what I would call mistakes, is extremely costly later. We have the great example of I-93, which is an interstate highway that was put right through the center of Boston, at the time considered a good decision, an elevated piece of infrastructure that then cost billions of dollars a few decades later to put it underground. Now, would it have been a better choice to put it underground in the first place? I would say yes, of course. Perhaps at the time we didn't necessarily have the technology necessarily to do so. I wanted to speak also just to the issue, because it's linked to, and it was mentioned earlier, for the possibilities of public-private partnerships. And I think that public-private partnerships certainly can play an important role in solving the infrastructure challenges. But I think it needs to be considered with great care. Right? Because, and this is probably familiar to many of you, but the challenges are not understanding properly risk allocation, not having the capability for the private sector to actually respond, and not having competition amongst the private sector, which can be problematic for a range of reasons that are probably obvious to most. And I think a range of other challenges that I think are important. What's critical is that we have good sponsors of such projects, that there's a good rationale for such projects. That means actually strong ex-ante analysis. And that ex-ante analysis should also look at the broad range of positive and negative externalities, which are not trivial to estimate, which suggests, in fact, very good analytical techniques should be used ex ante, and also of course, a good ex post, because that can then inform later projects. And a lot of this suggests that strategically we need to have first the proper institutional, legal, and regulatory framework to make sure that these projects are done properly, to once more have a good evaluation process, to ensure that the right risks and guarantees are used, not to allow the so-called Project White Elephants to advance, but to allow the risks to be allocated in the best way possible. Recognizing, finally, I think a few key aspects that such projects should be geared towards economic empowerment and be pro-poor, and should definitely be accounting for externalities, especially in light of our efforts to our need to respond to the climate crisis, to mitigate transportation's role in that. And I want to just say once more, I recognize that we here in the United States are a primary culprit in the current climate crisis we're facing due to our historic and continued contribution to this problem. So I'm not saying that, oh, this is a problem for your region, the AIIB region, to face. But we all need to face this together, and hopefully we can learn from past errors and mistakes, such as those that I would say we've committed in the United States, to help not only the region develop equitably and sustainably, but the rest of the world as well. I'll end there in the interest of time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zagras. I mean, the sort of high-level messages that I internalized with that first round of discussion was that a clear objective is essential, pragmatic reality, and initial conditions are key for connectivity projects to succeed. And Professor Zagras also reminded us about the institutional and regulatory dimensions that are essential for PPP projects to succeed and not get a bad name. So I'll now move on, and I'll bring in Ms. Listriana again. Indonesia is at a critical geographic location. What are the main strategies of Indonesia to enhance the resilience of the supply chain and energy security through connectivity with other countries? Ms. Listriana, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Patel. Currently, actually, there are three important policies that enhance Indonesia effort and enhance supply chains and energy supply. The first is the designation of strategic economic zone. Up to this day, there are 18 special economic zones in Indonesia, which aim to enhance export competitiveness and growth and foster investment and regional development. Also, we have free trade zone. Currently, we have 5 actually, 4 in Kepri Islands, Batam, Bintan, Regency, Karimun, and also Tanjung Pinang. And also we have in Sabang, Aceh. This aims to increase trade sectors and enhance export competitiveness. Also, we have industrial estate. Most of 126 industrial estate in Indonesia, and 18 of them constitute as a national strategic project, which may gain particular incentive in their development. And lastly, we have also a tourism sector estate that we built the tourism stage for the supporting of our tourism sector, because tourism sector is one of priority sector that will gain most profits for our country. Actually, we are currently design 10 area as priority tourism estate. And the second thing is strengthening energy transition and downstream industry policy. Energy transition is inevitable and must be faced. Sustainable and clean energy transition is one of the 3 priority issues for Indonesia's G20 presidency this year. In adherence to that, Indonesia stands firmly to commit creating collective efforts to foster the clean energy transition. This also reflected Indonesia targeted of 23% renewable energy mix production by 2025, and the adoption of the enhanced nationally determined contributions or enhanced per September 2022. Indonesia has also planned comprehensive mitigation action for 2050 long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience, which also includes plans to enhance capacity of workforce and provision of quality green jobs. Our government put an extensive thought in increasing the added value of commodities by promoting downstream industry development. One commodity that become the main focus of this policy is a nickel processing industry. This also aligns with Indonesia's national priority for renewable energy transition, which includes strengthening the automotive and electronic manufacturing industry that derive from nickel products. And the third is strengthening the cooperation in transportation connectivity sector. This year, actually, we come into accord with several multilateral cooperation in transportation connectivity. One is EMTGT, or Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle Agreed on the sea and air connectivity development, including opening more flights and cruise routes between member states and partners countries. Also, BMIAGA, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines is ASEAN Growth Area Agreed on the strategic transportation corridor routes and development strategies. And then Indonesia-Singapore Economic Working Group, which has encouraged the implementation of cross-border travel bubble. And other than multilateral cooperation, Indonesia and Japan agreed to cooperate for Jabodetabek Urban Transportation Policy Integration Project. The cooperation project aims to increase capacity and coordination mechanism stakeholders related to urban public transport development. And fourth, strengthening digital connectivity sector. Complementing our green plans, we are delighted to report on the development of digital connectivity. Government of Indonesia is developing Palaparing network and multifunction satellite named Satria, which upgrades national digital network capacity, backbone network resilience, and increase national internet exchange point. This network also be connected to international landing point. Indonesia also boosts sea cable investment. For example, the construction of submarine cables connected to the United States. I think that's all, Mr. Moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Listriana. May I come to back to Mr. Satwinder Singh? If you could please reflect on the role of multilateral organizations, including MDBs, in promoting regional connectivity, and if there are any priorities for this work in ASEAN, if you could say a few words on that, Mr. Satwinder Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. I think the region cannot do without working with multilaterals like yourselves. To us, we are, like I said, we are at the critical stage of transformation. There's a huge amount of work that need to be worked together, especially in the space of de-risking and the ability for us to work together even in transition financing that's needed by both the energy and the transport sectors. It's as simple as a lot of those investments that are going to be made in these areas, they are going to be into areas which are not entrenched, they are not established areas. So therefore, the risk is really going to be much, much higher than regular infrastructure projects. I think this is where a special role that actually exists for multilaterals to come in to provide that joint confidence together with sovereigns in order to be able to then bring in and support private capital and bring that confidence in to take on some of these challenges when it comes to the new areas of transformation. I'll give you an example. I think we are looking at setting up an entire strengths in transportation, especially in the area of EV, to build up an entire ecosystem of EV infrastructure in all of our ASEAN member states, starting with economies like Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. And we can clearly see that this is a space where, it's not something that we do. We have done this in the past. So definitely when you come to major infrastructure changes, accommodating EV network, I think, again, this will be the kind of projects where there has to be a step in by sovereigns and multilaterals to come in to support that. provide that de-risking cover at the same time, provide us that transition financing that we need in order to build those infrastructures. Same thing with power. I think when you're talking about power today, the focus, behind EV network, you can't do without the ability for us to provide decarbonized energy. And most of that energy potentially today, I think while we are moving towards renewables, still the bulk of it is going to come from traditional fossil sources. So where we need to really build is ability for us to look for financing that will help us to de-risk and provide transition financing towards investment into technologies that will help us decarbonize fossil sources, help us to capture the carbon to be used for industrial use. And that power then, which is much more responsible power, then will be able to then at the back support all of this renewable infrastructure that's going to be invested in the EV network. So I'm just giving you a kind of like a transport environment ecosystem that really is interdependent, and you can see there's a huge amount of complexity involving the success of it. And behind it, I think that's where the holistic thinking is critical. I think it's very, very, it's frightening when sometimes the black and white analysis being used on what is right and what is wrong, and that's what frightens us, because what the region and the whole world needs is really transition financing, financing that is responsible, smart, but at the same time is able to pull communities along and also provide the right solutions. So to me, I think that will be what I want to emphasize. What the other second area where I feel we need to really work a lot closer is in capacity development. And most of it is really related towards building the capacities of project promoters. Many of us in our part of the world, I think when it's no lack of like I said, the bankability of the opportunity, but I think when it comes to putting up the projects responsibly towards financiers, I think this is where we are struggling. And this is where I see the multilateral capacity programs. And we have some very active programs with AIIB. I want to thank you for that. But again, those are the kind of projects that we need to scale, because there's a lot to do. We need to bring people along. And the capacity building projects that we want to work with you, I think are going to go a long way in helping us to make the whole region's projects bankable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satwinder Singh. I would just like to echo what you said, that zealotry is not going to take us far, and pragmatic solutions, which are of a non-corner nature, are very much the way to go forward, including liking it or not, reliant on stable sources of power for many essential modern realities. And I think one of the issues that we occasionally forget, that even in renewables, there is often not as equitable distribution of renewable energy sources as we think, and as one works at a granular level in a multilateral development bank, that is what we find, that some countries are far less endowed than others, even in the renewable space. So thank you for reminding us, Mr. Satwinder Singh. May I request Mr. Gelani, if you could elaborate on, as you pointed out, the infrastructure investment needs cannot be met solely with public resources. So how can multilateral development banks enable greater private sector funding, including from funds like yours, for cross-border infrastructure? So if you could enlighten us on this and related matters. Thank you, Mr. Al-Gelani.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. I think, yes, you're right. And I think, again, I would re-emphasize that the fact that the establishment of an entity like the National Infrastructure Fund of Saudi Arabia is a demonstration of the need that the private sector participation is key. is important to the local demand, to the local infrastructure demand, and also to the, I think, the regional ambitions that Saudi Arabia has, for example, with connecting itself with the neighboring countries. And again, I would emphasize on the fact that one has, and I think it has been just mentioned now, that capacity building is key. Capacity building would come in the form of educating and basically raising the awareness of people who would be, dealing with, with infrastructure projects and promoting infrastructure projects, to understand what bankability means. At the end of the day, especially for those countries and for those who have been, living and dealing with, the conventional government procurement. It's a mindset shift that has to happen for them to understand what what bankability means. So it's not just a bureaucratic process of just tendering a project and then getting the necessary funding from the different ministries of finance. It's in fact a collaborative efforts that has to take place between the procurers, between the private sector, be it the developers, be it the lenders, be it the insurance companies. At the end of the day, what you need to make sure is that risk allocation is well managed, is well allocated among the different participants, so that at the end of the day, the ultimate objective of delivering the infrastructure takes place. Now, for those who are not familiar with the approach, that could be, I would say a difficult process because it will require a lot of steps before you can then declare a project ready for public-private partnerships. And that's, I think, in the interim, what one could propose is basically the multilateral the MDBs and the multilateral organizations to step in, offering its services to the countries that are in need, and that would require closer interaction, continuous dialogue with those countries, and with a mindset that has to keep in mind that it's not one size fits all, and there is no rule of thumb for every country. When you look at a region like the Middle East, you see the different solutions could vary quite significantly from one part to the other, where you could find countries and nations that are aiming for growth, aiming for positioning themselves for better positions regionally and internationally. Other nations may not be so fortunate, and they are still struggling to satisfy their basic needs. So the solutions that would be offered to country A versus country B would be completely different. So that interim, engagement, or that interim stipend that has to, or that's proposed to be, to be taken by the multilateral organizations, has to keep that in mind. If you don't get people to the right level where they can, understand bankability, definitely nothing will happen. And therefore, one cannot expect that much will happen in the different regions. Now, I think what's good it wasn't at all good, the pandemic, the whole pandemic, story that we have been through. But I think one of the realizations that the world seems to now get to is that globalization, as you know, it may not be necessarily serving its purposes. There is no much the whole supply chain disturbance that happened afterwards gave us a loud and clear evidence and feedback that we need to have some buffer. And we cannot just push the whole supply chain to be, always competitive and cost-effective and cost-efficient. The world has to accept a certain level of regionalization, if I may use the term, a certain level of localization, because we don't want the world to go the complete opposite of globalization and into isolation and self-sufficiency. And that means if we accept that notion of regionalization and localization, and we apply that across to the different sectors, that means that we will need to think about some sort of modular arrangement among the different regions where, a certain level of localizing the supply chains and cross-border transaction then has to take place. So it's a long journey. It's not going to be. It's not something that we should expect over a year or two. It's a long process. I think more fortunate nations and would need to play probably a bigger role compared to others. I think the multilateral organizations like the AIIB could play a major role given how it's structured and given the access they may have across the different nations. So I hope that addresses the question that you raised, Dr. Patel, but that's in a nutshell how we see it.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Gilani. I think it was good you reminded us of that while just in time is important for profits, on many instances in our lives, just in case is important for survival, and I think that has helped to explain policies that have been introduced over the last 2-3 years in many parts of the world. I would like to bring in Professor Zagras again. And I think it touches a bit on what Mr. Al-Gilani said about how the pandemic has changed some things. And I would like to hear Professor Zagras's view on what implications of digitalization would bring on the regional transport and energy connectivity, and anything you would like to add in this general area. So, Professor Zagras, please.
Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, it's still somewhat speculative, right? Because we're only emerging from the pandemic, which has greatly changed the way we interact once more, as we're doing right now. I think digitalization has a number of potential impacts. One is, as I mentioned earlier, it is a way of enhancing accessibility with a relatively low cost, right? Whether it be the financial cost, the investment cost, or the carbon and other negative externalities costs. I will also say, so here I'm speaking of, the ability to substitute for mobility, while still providing accessibility. Yet, of course, I don't think it's a perfect substitute. I believe that this is a great panel, and I'm thanking the organizers of it. But all else equal, it would be better if we were together, probably, right? Because we'd have exchanges, we'd build social capital, which this world needs. And I think another element of it that's critical is digitalization itself is clearly a product of the innovation of we as humans. And time and time again, the evidence has shown that much of that innovation is driven by the exchange of tacit knowledge, meaning that which cannot be easily codified. And that is still primarily most effectively delivered through face-to-face interactions and communications, and many of the spontaneous interactions and communications that happen when we are able to bump into each other. Many of us may live in such settings. MIT is a hub of such a setting here in the greater Boston area, that we've been able to experience all the benefits from. Highly innovative economy, highly growing and wealth generating economy, with actually for the region a relatively low amount of physical mobility or motorized physical mobility, because in fact much of it happens because it's a densely populated area. So that's one aspect of it. There's a trade-off once more between proximity, mobility, and the end goal, which is accessibility. But there's other aspects of digitalization, I think, that we're all experiencing in some degree or the other. There's a lot of clearly we're moving towards automated mobility, which is enabled by the digitalization of mobility. And I think the time is right to figure out how we do that well, so that we can ensure that automated mobility is done in a way that enhances economic opportunities for people, that enhances the ability for mobility to be provided in an environmentally just way. But I wanted to say of the other aspect of digitalization that I think I'll focus on, given that time is short, is that it allows us to, in theory, make the system much more efficient. And there, again, there's some evidence of this, right? So we have a better ability to predict demand because we know better the nature of the demand, and we have a better ability to match that demand in real time with supply. So it lends itself to potentially great efficiencies, which could result in the need for smaller footprints of infrastructure, for smaller total number of smaller total number of vehicles in fleets, and a better level of service for all of those involved, whether they be people or whether they be goods. Not to diminish what we've heard previously about the fragility of supply chains. Of course, hopefully this technology can help us enhance the resilience of and robustness of supply chains. I wanted to, if I may, just add a few other parts that are not unrelated, I think, to the comments on public-private partnerships and the role of the multilaterals in this realm. I think once more, I'm an advocate of PPPs. I'll use that shorthand when they make sense. But I think, once more, I want to just emphasize that first, we need to make sure we have the proper strategies for transportation infrastructure services. That should be priority number one. The second is the right environment and procurement process, meaning the proper legal, regulatory, institutional, contractual frameworks, independent auditing for negotiations, dispute resolution mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. That, I think, is really important for the multilaterals can help set that table, so to speak. There's a lot of opportunity for peer learning across the region, but without a well-structured regulatory framework first, that's, I believe, should be fully independent from the concession promoting agency. I think that the process can go wrong. And once more, I think international agencies could also do well to focus on how PPPs can be done in a pro-poor way and a pro-climate way. And I think I'll end it there in the interest of time. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Zagras. I think you're absolutely right. I think there was an initial burst of PPPs which were essentially set up to bypass the fiscal constraints of national governments, and I think that's not a good objective for PPPs. It has to be the allocation of risk to stakeholders who are best able to manage them. So I think that's a good point. We have a few minutes for Q&A, and I will read out one of them to start with. The questioner says that the previous just-in-time supply chain is significantly disrupted and challenged by the recent events geopolitically, and the impact is long-lasting and profound. And the question is directed towards the representatives of governments on our panel. That are you repositioning the national and regional supply chain, and what is the signal to the investment in the transport sector in this regard? So may I request Ms. Listriana and then perhaps Mr. Al-Ghelani. So Ms. Listriana, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yeah, actually, right now our government trying to participate and how develop the strategy become one of members of global supply chains. So in terms of our many strategic economic zone, also we bring up the collaboration with many countries actually, and we're trying to develop such a cooperation amongst such countries, not only in Asia, as well as maybe in Europe and maybe in US and others, yeah. Also in the AUA and maybe other country. Dealing with this opportunity, actually, the government also trying to open more relaxation of the policy. We give also the incentive, yeah, for build this cooperation among the countries. And also, I think in terms of participate in this global supply chains, we're trying to offer many incentives that proper in our economic strategic zone, or for instance, special economic zone, and also industrial estate, tourism area estate, and also in our free trade zone. And I think, Mr. Moderator, in terms of this opportunity that we invite by the AIIB, we also open the involvement and or maybe a cooperation with AIIB and maybe others institution that can support for the contribute of our funding need, yeah, in our development of infrastructure. I think we also need support in terms of the infrastructure financing support. Also, we still need the support for our human resource development, because we still need capacity development for our human resources. And the third, also, we're trying to create and develop collaboration to promote our investment opportunity in our special economic zone or strategic economic zone. So, furthermore, I think this opportunity, the government still welcome and opening to others institutions in terms of private or maybe the funding for others related institutions that can support us to fulfill our need of the infrastructure. I think that's all, Mr. Dr. Petro. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Listriana. May I request Mr. Al-Gilani to give his views on that last comment, please?
Sure. Well, I think Dr. Patel, I think it's for example, in Saudi Arabia, I think it's happening. It's happening in the sense that it has been realized, it has been recognized, and we are actually in the action phase. The government has just announced its initiative for localizing and adopting, in fact, it has been gradually building up over the last few years. Local content and localization has been a key agenda for the government, and it's serving two purposes. One is there are certain critical infrastructure that require localizing its supply chain, just to make sure that we are addressing the risk or the uncertainty that we could have, and the pandemic has been a great lesson for everyone. Be it in the health sector or water, power, and transportation. But also there is also the opportunity that, for example, I think the opportunity that certain countries would like to position themselves on the greater world map when it comes to logistic hubs, and I think that's has been I think been the case in a number of jurisdictions where this is more of a competition, I would say, field for nations and countries. And with that, definitely there will be, the need for infrastructure to, associated infrastructure to enable that to happen, whether be it ports, be it special, and economic zones, be it railways, and aviation, and all of that definitely will help. I think the faster that would deploy resources and strategy into that, the better the positioning will be for the future. Now, would that happen in silos, and would that happen in unilateral way? I think that's what we would need to see in the coming few years, and I hope that we would not be in a position where we see fragmented kind of projects and opportunities that are on up for financing and for business to participate in, with no proper justifications and proper feasibility studies. So I think that to Rob, I think probably it's worth reconsidering how we should make sure that a collective and collaborative effort can take place at multilateral organizations to make sure that there is a platform for people to talk, to exchange views, and hopefully bring better solutions to the world.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Gilani. We are running out of time now, so I will just end by thanking our speaker, Ms. Sharifa Khan, the panelists, Ms. Listriana, Mr. Satwinder Singh, Mr. Al-Gilani, and Professor Zagras. Finally, this whole seminar was organized by my younger and brighter colleagues, and I want to thank them, Wan Lee, Wymin, Emil, and Mandy. Thank you very much, and have a very good rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you very much.